Well, the M1 is, of course, a safer road than most roads in ordinary circumstances, but it suddenly becomes dangerous in fog, and there are particular stretches of the motorway, of which this is one, which are very prone to fog and have spectacular accidents in the middle of it. The best sort of fog warning signs are electronically controlled ones, which put up a large illuminated word saying fog, accident, or whatever it is ahead. These have been installed on some stretches of motorway, down on the M4, down on the motorways from Birmingham to Bristol. But on the M1, and in particular at this point, between Pinxton and Kegworth, where fog is a very frequent hazard, all we have are little triangles, which the police have to put up and take down before and after fog or an accident on the motorway. And the police have plenty of other things to do. It's difficult for them always to put them up as promptly as they might be, or to take them down as promptly as they might be taken down. And they don't catch the attention so readily as these very spectacular, large illuminated signs. The point about them isn't so much that you need to warn people of fog, because of course anybody driving a car should be able to see that he's in fog. But what if you do have a large flashing sign with saying that an accident has occurred in the fog? It might bring some of these lunatic drivers to their senses and get them to slow down and really alert them to the danger, to behave sensibly once they find themselves in the middle of a patch of it. Well, one of the first things I took up with the Department of Environment was the question of whether any particular sort of driver was responsible. Some of this conduct is so almost insane that one thinks it may be a particular type of driver, either someone with a bad motoring record, or young drivers, or people in sports cars. Not at all. The depressing thing is, it turns out to be perfectly ordinary, reasonable, sometimes experienced drivers who just behave foolishly, lulled perhaps by the fact that on a motorway, once they get into the fog. And I've driven along this section at what I regarded was a moderate speed, and I don't think I'm an especially nervous or timid driver. And going past one, you have long, snake-like chains of cars all going far too fast, all following the man in front because they seem to believe that in some way he can see better than they can, trying to keep in touch with rear lights. And it only needs one man to go wrong and an enormous pile-up takes place. And on this particular stretch, the record pile-up we've achieved so far is 73 vehicles involved in one crash. But the worrying thing is each year there are more instances of this type occurring and more people are getting killed on this particular section. And rather than just report it and just express our horror, we've got to get this fact across the public, get them to really concentrate on the dangerous areas and do what can be done by way of aids and safety devices to minimise the risk to the careful driver who's trying to get through all this. This stretch was only opened fully in 1967, and at first it didn't carry very heavy traffic, and it still doesn't carry as heavy traffic as some other parts of the motorway system. But the number of people being killed and injured keeps going up. In 1968, 3 people were killed. In 1969, 6 people were killed. In 1970, 8 people are killed. Already this year, we've had motorway incidents in the fog, and the figures look like getting worse. The traffic's going to increase on this stretch as well, because the new Nottingham-Birmingham motorway is going to come into a motorway junction right in the middle of this area, which seems to be so prone to fog. And before that's brought in, obviously we've got to do something to make sure the statistics don't then soar to make a quite tragic number of people killed in the not too distant future. Crash barriers have been a debatable point for some time, but evidence now seems to have come down in favour of them on balance. They increase some hazards, but they eliminate a very, very serious one of people going across the central reservation. A new crash barrier program's been announced, but again, the pace of it and the priorities in constructing it seem to have been chosen quite at random. And this particular stretch isn't going to get any central crash barriers till 1973 or 1974. Before that time, quite a lot will have happened, and they can be of some help in the sort of accident we're talking about. At least one of these multiple pile-ups has spilled over from one completely blocked carriageway into the other carriageway and then blocked traffic coming the other way. Central reservations would have helped in that one, and I think the evidence has shown they reduce accident figures generally. The dangerous spots, I think, should tend to get them as quickly as possible and earlier in the programme. Too often we read of these large crashes, and they get a lot of publicity and a great sense of horror amongst the public at large. But once each one's over, nothing seems to be actually done following each crash. General exhortations are issued to motorists to try to improve driving behaviour. Some safety devices are brought in here and there. But no particular steps are taken to find out why on one stretch so many horrific crashes are taking place, and no concentration of effort is taking place to really focus on these black spot areas and put all we've got at the moment in way of knowledge on motorway accidents into those particular stretches. Money is a difficulty, of course, although it's an important problem that with loss of life involved justifies expenditure. But even with the money we are spending, if we'll only sort out what our priorities should be and where it can best be spent, we can produce better results for the money that is in fact available. At the moment it's being spread over the motorway system as a whole in what I think is a fairly random pattern and a fairly chance selection of the places to put the devices and the places to concentrate on.
Everything's well? Yeah, it's not a very good day to choose, I'm afraid.
It's not,
I think that's right.
We're open, the lights are on for some arrival.
Well, I've come back to see you again because the government's been hinting it's going to have a national airport policy because of things that are happening elsewhere. And I know that has some implications for the Midlands, you know. Clearly the Midlands area requires a regional airport, and if the government are going to have a national policy, it occurs to me it's time they started deciding between this airport and Birmingham and Coventry, which are competing with you for traffic a bit at the moment, aren't they?
Yes, that is true. It's nice to hear you say a national airport policy. For the first time, in my memory anyway, that this sort of thing might happen. Certainly, with the extensions that are going on, and I must apologise for all the impedimenta that goes with this building, then there is some competition for traffic of international or intercontinental status.
Yeah.
I don't believe that it's competitive at this stage. There is room for Birmingham. I won't say Birmingham and Coventry. There's room for ourselves. Birmingham, 3 million population. We've got 4,800,000 here, which we're both catering for.
Yes.
But the onward development is another matter.
Yes, a major international airport couldn't come at both, surely, could it?
It mustn't come at both. It
Yes.
would only be civic pride and a waste of everybody's
That's
money,
right.
I think. So there must be an evaluation of this site against that at Birmingham
Yes.
and the population it would serve.
Yes. Well, given you're still building this up, you know,
And I contend it's right to have an airport in the centre of two main conurbations, Sheffield, Rotherham, Doncaster on the one side, Birmingham on the other. That would be my contention.
Yeah.
It's right to have this airport situated on a motorway network to give good surface transport.
Yeah.
It is right to do it most economically, and I challenge anyone on the economics of development here against the economics of Birmingham.
Yeah.
And I think the Minister for Environment is now paying correct and due regard to the disruption of environment. Again, I'd challenge any of the pundits, do their
Yeah.
sums here. We disrupt less environment here than any other licensed airport in England.
Well, that's obviously the other problem I face. You see, many of my constituents would benefit from an international airport here. They're obviously
Yes.
going to be very near to it, benefiting from the service it can be developed. And yet alongside those people, there are people who fear they're going to be suffering from noise, going to have their environment spoiled. Do you think it's possible to develop a major international airport here, keeping down the nuisance in the area and the noise in the villages, particularly in my constituency, obviously, down to a minimum?
Keeping it down to a minimum, yes. It's an element of trust that the constituents in those areas have got to trust, first of all, ourselves to allow no avoidable noise here, and this I've always promised and I think I've carried out.
Yeah.
Secondly, that we appeal to the planners, both in Nottinghamshire and Derbyshire, either end of the runway, to maintain the very, very free areas we've got underneath the approaches to this airport at either end of the runway.
Yeah.
If they can do that, then this disruption will be minimal. If they go on building, they are building in trouble for you, for everybody.
Yes. Well, in my part of the world, they are concentrating development on particular villages. And so far as I can gather, the villages they are developing are not going to be the ones affected in any way at all. Some of the smaller ones obviously have a problem, and I have to discuss with you a bit more, you know, how much is going to be going on at night and
Yes.
how much landing is going to go on over their heads.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Willing for discussions at any time. The one word of caution I must inject here is, of course, that we're only 5 years old, and we really haven't started yet.
Yes.
313,000 passengers last year. We're capable of dealing with 2 million through here in a year. It must happen.
Yeah.
With it will come more frequent noise. I won't say greater magnitude each time, but more frequent noise. We can never at any time alter the line of approach onto the runway. That is there ad perpetuum.
Yes, you explained to me the problems of that. I remember when I came before. Yes.
Yes, well, this, as I say, is the sort of thing that the planners must try and guard for us.
Yes. Can you show me what you're doing now? What you're doing to the terminal? What the immediate problems
Willingly,
are?
yes. We'll show you our extensions now that are going ahead.
Well, Mr. Clarke, does this mean questions in the House after your discussions with the airport director, or what?
Oh, it probably will, actually, because this question of an airport policy is still being raised. It's been aroused by Coblington, of course, but I've actually already had discussions with a Member of Parliament from Bradford who's interested in the implications for the North. And the Midlands has a serious problem, and now the government are talking about an airport policy. It's high time we got on with discussing quite what it means for this area.
How secure is the future of the East Midlands Airport, do you think?
For the time being, it's secure because, as I understand it, although it's really the problem for local authorities who are financing it, of course, they still see it as a developing project which they're prepared to carry on backing, trying to build up its traffic, and its traffic's building up quite well. Still losing quite a bit of money for them, though. They're having to subsidise it, and I think its future's secure so long as the long-term development is there and it carries on building up.
But what about this argument between the East Midlands and Birmingham Airport? I mean, will one of them have to give way to the other eventually?
Well, my own feeling, this is of course I'm checking it with experts like Mr. Dyer or people who have a point of view to put, my own feeling is there's a major international airport. I'd be surprised if you could develop two of them so close together. And one of the things one's got to look into is the advantage of the two sites, what they do have to offer, how much it would cost to develop each one, and what sort of population they really can serve best.
I suppose your immediate concern, though, is the noise level, and that affects your constituents.
Yeah.
Have you had many complaints, and are you too seriously disturbed about the noise?
I've had quite a number of complaints, but of course as soon as I investigated it, I got people who said they were surprised to find I was complaining because the village which had been named, in which they lived, wasn't affected. And I have this business which must affect a lot of members of Parliament. I have some constituents who urge upon me the virtues of an airport and airport development and how they'd like international services coming in and out of the Midlands in a rather handier way. And then on the other hand, I have those constituents who complain that the airport is too close to their village and they fear it's going to affect their way of life and become noisy and a nuisance. And that's why one comes on this sort of visit, to try to find out exactly what the airport people are envisaging, how useful the projects they have in mind are, and if the airport is developed, quite what effect it is going to have on those unlucky people who might be adversely affected.